the back of his head, a whistlin' and talkin' as easy as you please. And when we come to the cottage, and the boy's mother come out all in a taking to see what's up, he whips off his cap, and says he, 'I've brought your son home, ma'am,' says he, 'because his leg hurt him, and I don't think that stick is enough for him to lean on, and I'm going to ask my grandfather to have a pair of crutches made for him.' And I'm blessed if the woman wasn't struck all of a heap, as well she might be. I thought I should 'a' exploded myself." When the Earl heard the story, he was not angry, as Wilkins had been half afraid that he would be. On the contrary, he laughed outright, and called Fauntleroy up to him, and made him tell all about the matter from beginning to end, and then he laughed again. And actually, a few days later, the Dorincourt carriage stopped in the green lane before the cottage where the lame boy lived, and Fauntleroy jumped out and walked up to the door, carrying a pair of strong, light, new crutches, shouldered like a gun, and presented them to Mrs. Hartle—the lame boy's name was Hartle—with these words: "My grandfather's compliments, and if you please, these are for your boy, and we hope he will get better." "I said your compliments," he explained to the Earl when he returned to the carriage. "You didn't tell me to, but I thought perhaps you forgot. That was right, wasn't it?" And the Earl laughed again, and did not say it was not. In fact, the two were becoming more intimate every day, and every day Fauntleroy's faith in his lordship's benevolence and virtue increased. He had no doubt whatever that his grandfather was the most amiable and generous of elderly gentlemen. Certainly he himself found his wishes gratified almost before they were uttered, and such gifts and pleasures were lavished upon him that he was sometimes almost bewildered by his own possessions. Apparently, he was to have everything he wanted, and to do everything he wished to do. And though this certainly would not have been a very wise plan to pursue with all small boys, his young lordship bore it amazingly well. Perhaps notwithstanding his sweet nature, he might have been somewhat spoiled by it, if it had not been for the hours he spent with his mother at Court Lodge. That best friend of his watched over him ever closely and tenderly. The two had many long talks together, and he never went back to the castle with her kisses on his cheeks without carrying in his heart some simple, pure words worth remembering. There was one thing, it is true, which puzzled the little fellow very much. He thought over the mystery of it much oftener than any one supposed. Even his mother did not know how often he pondered on it. The Earl for a long time never suspected that he did so at all. But being quick to observe, the little boy could not help wondering why it was that his mother and grandfather never seemed to meet. He had noticed that they never did meet. When the Dorincourt carriage stopped at Court Lodge, the Earl never alighted, and on the rare occasions of his lordship's going to church, Fauntleroy was always left to speak to his mother in the porch alone, or perhaps to go home with her. And yet every day fruit and flowers were sent to Court Lodge from the hothouses at the castle. But the one virtuous action of the Earl's which had set him upon the pinnacle of perfection in Cedric's eyes was what he had done soon after that first Sunday when Mrs. Errol had walked home from church unattended. About a week later, when Cedric was going one day to visit his mother, he found at the door, instead of the large carriage and prancing pair, a pretty little brougham and a handsome bay horse. "This is a present from you to your mother," the Earl said abruptly. "She cannot go walking about the country. She needs a carriage. The man who drives will take charge of it. It is a present from you." Fauntleroy's delight could but feebly express itself. He could scarcely contain himself until he reached the lodge. His mother was gathering roses in the garden. He flung himself out of the little brougham and flew to her. "Dearest!" he cried. "Could you believe it? This is yours. He says it is a present from me. It is your own carriage to drive everywhere in." He was so happy that she did not know what to say. She could not have borne to spoil his pleasure by refusing to accept the gift, even though it came from the man who chose to consider himself her enemy. She was obliged to step into the carriage, roses and all, and let herself be taken to drive, while Fauntleroy told her stories of his grandfather's goodness and amiability. They were such innocent stories that sometimes she could not help laughing a little, and then she would draw her little boy closer to her side and kiss him, feeling glad that he could see only good in the old man, who had so few friends. The very next day after that, Fauntleroy wrote to Mr. Hobbs. He wrote quite a long letter, and after the first copy was written, he brought it to his grandfather to be inspected. "Because," he said, "it's so uncertain about the spelling, and if you tell me the mistakes, I'll write it out again." This is what he had written: "My dear Mr. Hobbs, I want to tell you about my grandfather. He is the best Earl you ever knew. It is a mistake about Earls being tyrants. He is not a tyrant at all. I wish you knew him. You would be good friends. I am sure you would. He has gout in his foot and is a great sufferer. But he is so patient. I love him more every day because no one could help loving an Earl like that, who is kind to everyone in this world. I wish you could talk to him. He knows everything in the world. You can ask him any question. But he has never played baseball. He has given me a pony and a cart, and my mamma has a beautiful carriage, and I have 3 rooms and toys of all kinds. It would surprise you. You would like the castle and the park. It is such a large castle. You could lose yourself, Wilkins tells me. Wilkins is my groom. He says there is a dungeon under the castle. It is so pretty everything in the park would surprise you. There are such big trees, and there are deers and rabbits and games flying about in the cover. My grandfather is very rich, but he is not proud and 'aughty as you thought Earls always were. I like to be with him. The people are so polite and kind. They take off their hats to you, and the women make curtsies and sometimes say, 'God bless you.' I can ride now, but at first it shook me when I trotted. My grandfather let a poor man stay on his farm when he could not pay his rent, and Mrs. Mellon went to take wine and things to his sick children. I should like to see you, and I wish Dearest could live at the castle, but I am very happy when I don't miss her too much. And I love my grandfather. Everyone does. Please write soon. Your affectionate old friend, Cedric Errol. P.S. No one is in the dungeon. My grandfather never had anyone languishing in there. P.S. He is such a good Earl. He reminds me of you. He is a universal favorite." "Do you miss your mother very much?" asked the Earl when he had finished reading this. "Yes," said Fauntleroy. "I miss her all the time." He went and stood before the Earl and put his hand on his knee, looking up at him. "You don't miss her, do you?" he said. "I don't know her," answered his lordship rather crustily. "I know that," said Fauntleroy, "and that's what makes me wonder. She told me not to ask you any questions, and I won't. But sometimes I can't help thinking, you know, and it makes me all puzzled. But I'm not going to ask any questions. And when I miss her very much, I go and look out my window to where I see her light shine for me every night through an open place in the trees. It is a long way off, but she puts it in her window as soon as it is dark, and I can see it twinkle far away, and I know what it says." "What does it say?" asked my lord. "It says, 'Good night. God keep you all the night.' Just what she used to say when we were together. Every night she used to say that to me, and every morning she said, 'God bless you all the day.' So you see, I am quite safe all the time." "Quite, I have no doubt," said his lordship dryly, and he drew down his beetling brows and looked at the little boy so fixedly and so long that Fauntleroy wondered what he could be thinking of. Chapter 9